Welcome to today's LinkedIn Live discussion brought to you by Optiv, the cyber advisory and solutions leader. We host these sessions on LinkedIn because we want to hear from you in real time. Please share your thoughts by dropping questions in the comments and chats, and we'll do our best to answer them before we end the conversation today. I'm Melissa Pihl. I am the Cloud Alliance Manager here at Optiv, and with me today I have John Pelton, the VP of Detection and Response, and Ben Spencer, a Senior Domain Security Advisor for our Managed Services practice. Today, we're going to discuss the strengths and challenges of managed detection and response, choosing a solution and building a process with MDR in mind, unifying detection and response in a multi-cloud environment. Let's kick it off with John. First, let's talk about what it means when we say most managed detection and response services are designed for scale and alerts. Why is this insufficient?
Yeah, it's a great question, Melissa. I think typically what we see there is most MDR providers and services, they're really only designed to take care of those initial alerts, in the initial triage, and a lot of times it's automated. And unfortunately, that causes a lot of people to miss the forest through the trees, right? They're missing the overall incident. They're actually not getting to the root cause. They're not stringing together and taking a step back when they've had a detection that where is this actually in the overall attack against their environment? What were the steps that possibly led up to this? Maybe what did not trigger a detection? So when they only take care of those individual alerts, they're missing the full picture there. And in those cases, you don't actually catch the attackers at that point. You're just responding to an individual alert, which it's great that you had that detection. It's great that maybe you can take a step to contain or mitigate that from progressing further. But when you don't have the telemetry to understand what were the things that led up to this, the attacker could still have a foothold within the environment. And I don't think that those providers are able to provide that full oversight over the environment. And it just causes dwell time. So I see that not all MDR services are the same. A lot experience some similar challenges. And I think understanding what your MDR provider is really good at, where can they actually integrate within my environment? Do they have the right integrations versus where might there be some challenges, where maybe they not have that visibility? That's really going to help create a partnership if you better understand what their capabilities are and how they can better integrate into your environment. But the TLDR of that is MDR providers in many cases struggle to see that bigger picture. And that's where we've designed our service to really address. We have the technology to integrate all of that data within. We need that telemetry to actually do that root cause so we can fully kick an attacker out of the environment.
And John, Melissa, sorry, I know you sent that over to John, but I did want to call out there. I think John really brings up a good point there in the fact that you can't just like solve a point in time problem in security, right? Or it's not just one, you're not just solving a single alert. You're not just solving for an event in time. All of this are people on the other end, or sometimes automated actions that are doing things throughout your environment. And if you only see one piece of it and you solve for that singular piece and don't look at the wider picture, ultimately what ends up happening is you're just solving for point in time issues. You see, okay, we've got someone whose account's been tipped over. We've seen an endpoint that's compromised. What you're not seeing is, okay, you actually have a massive leak of your entire Active Directory because someone's been sitting in there leaking that. They've been able to pull that information and sent that out. I come from an incident response background, and I saw this repeatedly where people had actual compromises for months, and there were indicators of it, right? But all they were ever doing was thinking, oh, okay, this initial access portion, we're solving for this. And then ultimately in the end, there was actually a much wider breach that no one ever looked at because no one ever went deeper to figure out, okay, why is this account actually compromised? Why is this endpoint actually compromised? How did this actually happen? And what else is being affected here? And from an MDR provider standpoint, you have to understand that's what you're trying to solve for at this point. You're not solving for point in time viruses like we were 15 years ago, right? We're solving for actual compromises and actual people whose whole jobs it is to go in here and compromise entire enterprises and make money off of them, right? It's a very different threat landscape.
Well, what are some of the strengths of an MDR that are essential to dealing with today's threat environments?
I think the big thing here, and talking off of what we just spoke about, context, right? It's not just, hey, what alert, is this alert a true positive or a false positive? Hey, go and solve this, right? You have to have the context related to this. Is this behavior normal for this account, right? Or this endpoint? Are they doing things that you would expect? Or is this so out of the ordinary that that not only is this endpoint compromised, but this account's compromised? And if this account's compromised, what does that actually mean? Why did this account get compromised in the first place? What am I not seeing? And having that context, I think, is so important. And that allows you to drive your response actions further. I think that's the most critical part from a managed detection and response service, or any sort of detection and response service, is you can't just solve for, okay, we had a phishing email, people clicked on it. It's, okay, not only, hey, why did we have this phishing email, but did people click on it? And then are their accounts tipped over? Do we have a key set up that they've been able to bypass MFA? It's a completely separate problem than just that alert. You have to go deeper, and you have to dive in to actually figure out what is the actual security issue that we're solving for here.
Yeah, and to build on that, right, I do see a lot of challenges in some of the platforms around having that right context in a consumable way. Even just something as simple as when you see an alert, like, what is the job profile of this individual, right? Do I have somebody who is a lawyer that I'm seeing launch PowerShell scripts? Like, that should immediately throw some additional red flags from an analyst perspective to understand that based on what they're paid to do, this is not within their normal job functions. Whereas if it's one of their IT administrators or developers, maybe that is something more common, and they allow unsigned certificates within the environment and scripts there. So having that context directly in front of an analyst and bringing that to them just allows them to make better decisions much more rapidly. And we've historically seen a lot of challenges with bringing that context forward in a human consumable way.
I just wanted to say hey to Abhishek. How's it going?
So when you're choosing an MDR solution for your environment, what are some things to look for, both from the vendor side and the technical capability side?
Yeah, so I think a couple things from the provider perspective is grill them on some questions, right? What does an investigation for a non-standard alert look like, right? To Ben's point, like just seeing an IOC match against threat intelligence, that's great. Most providers are going to be able to do that very, very well. But how about something that doesn't fit such an obvious scenario? And what do they do? How do they react to those situations? What do their analysts do immediately once they do discover a true positive that might be related to a large-scale compromise? And do they have the bench to bring in additional resources to take it further? Or are they going to say, hey, something happened, go ahead and enact IR and wash your hands and we're done there? I think from a technology integration perspective, you need to understand what does the provider use? Are they black boxing a lot of their intellectual property? Do you have visibility into your telemetry in the cases that they're working with full audit capabilities? Or is it that black box where it's trust us, we'll create all of these outcomes for you and don't worry about it? I'm a big fan of transparency and sharing data, spot checking, rolling up your sleeves and investigating with the client or the client with the provider to make sure that everybody's on the same page there. Is this provider transparent, or is there some magic that's happening in the background that might not be all it's worked up to be? And I also think understanding that driving the end result here, which is rapid time to detect and respond there, to get the right levels of automation in place, there is a crawl, walk, run, right? Any provider that says, like, we'll deploy the solution in 24 hours and everything's going to be mitigated, and there's going to be you're not going to need IR, like, that's just not how security works. It's not that easy. If it was, none of us really would have jobs there. So understanding that you need to take the time to partner with your provider and walk through a few scenarios. Where do you have pre-approval to contain or mitigate versus where do we need human in the loop? And how can we continue to build that trust? Ideally, we want the output of the MDR provider to fit very seamlessly into the input of your process to take it further. And it takes time to work through that and talk through that and figure out how feasible is what they're proposing and actually integrating within your environment. There needs to be soft handoffs. You can't have everything just thrown over the fence, or we did this and we created this outcome and it's all complete now, right? There's always going to be steps that you need to take. Maybe a system needs to be re-imaged or re-provisioned, getting re-enrolled back into app registration, etc. Those are things that it takes time. So work with a provider who's willing to invest with you and step through the playbooks and get very granular and be able to adjust to context on your side so that you can really ensure a seamless outcome. The worst thing that can happen is it's all magic, it's all black box. AI is doing everything behind the scenes and it's creating the security outcomes. Realistically, that's not how this works. So find a provider that will partner with you.
And I do just want to call something out there. The thing is, hey, automation, day one automation, we're going to solve everything, right? Think about what that actually means. Does that mean it's going to be specific to your environment, or they actually, if they're saying, hey, we can solve everything from an automation standpoint, we can do all this day one, that really honestly means that they're not doing anything that's specific to your environment, right? You're just sending stuff into a very scalable solution that they're going to automate it out there. So think about that. Think about what people are saying to you when they talk to you about their detection response service there. It's as Sean said, it's not that easy, right? To just do this at scale and everything's solved.
All right, John, what does it look like to effectively unify detection and response in a multi-cloud environment?
Yeah, I think that comes back to some of the points that I mentioned in the previous response, but you need to find a provider that does integrate with your technology. I would say it's a red flag in many cases, whereas if they're very strict and say, we only support this, or you need to rip out all of your pieces and put in our technology stack, right? You are going to get vendor locked in there, and at renewal time, your price is going to be through the roof. So looking for providers and technology that can really do multi-cloud, right? At Optiv, we support a lot more than just MDR. We have clients in AWS, Azure, GCP, and we have integrations to take data in and do native response actions in all of those platforms. So when looking at a provider, I think you really need to understand, where do they actually have supported integrations, and do they have expertise, or is this a hyper-specific MDR where maybe it's only built around one of the cloud providers and maybe a specific endpoint technology, right? That's going to be much more limited. And as your organization grows, I think that you're going to struggle for that MDR provider to continue to provide the value that you need out of them. So the way that we built our service is along the principle of interoperability, right? We want our clients to pick the best technology or cloud provider to support and protect their business. And then we've designed this service to then integrate all of that together. So it doesn't matter if you have some in AWS and some in Azure and GCP, or all in one of those providers. We can integrate all of that together to really drive those outcomes. So you really need to find somebody who is more of an open ecosystem and not a hyper-specific built service that is only around one technology, given we see organizations' needs grow, strategies change, and as your strategy changes, you don't always want to think about, well, I also need to change my MDR and my detection response capabilities or providers at this point, because it no longer fits within their mold. That becomes really disruptive, adds risk to the organization. I'd advise picking somebody who can really work and support true multi-cloud environments and is not a closed wall ecosystem there.
Over to you, Ben. How can MDR help link an organization's cloud environments and SecOps?
So it's a good question. One of the things I will call out is trying to put this all together. There's this concept of single pane of glass, right? And there's been a lot of work to try to do single panes of glass. There's been a lot of work to try to say, hey, analysts, you can just go look at one thing and you're going to get all the information. You're going to be investigated out of this. In my experience, right, it sounds really great. There's a lot of CNAPP platforms and cloud security posture management platforms that try to bring this in, but ultimately, often they just work in isolation, right? You've got a single pane of glass, but then you have to dive in and then you're looking at one platform, then the other, then the other. It's not really a single pane of glass, right? It's a pane of glass, and then you've got little stained glass aspects of that single pane of glass is the way that I like to look at it. It's not just one thing. You look at it, you got a whole overview. It's really hard to do that. The thing that I will call out is if you're going to work with a managed detection and response provider, and if you're going to work with someone who's trying to bring this all together, ultimately, part of your job is to bring that as a single pane of glass, right? The part of that is to say, hey, we're going to take all this disparate pieces of information, all these different alerts and all these account compromises and everything else there that don't really have any logical link up, right? We're not in some standardized environment here where everything's different at this point. And that's the way the industry is going to be for probably the next 5 years at least. Ultimately, right, you have to be able to leverage that, and an MDR provider should be able to say, okay, we've taken alerts from this Azure or this Entra ID aspect of this, and we say, hey, this account was compromised, and then we saw this IAM account be compromised. That should not be on you if you say, it should not be on you if they say, okay, we responded to this alert where this Entra AD account was compromised, and then, by the way, also at the same time, this IAM account was compromised. That's on them. They should be bringing that to you and saying, hey, this account as a whole, all of these identities across there were compromised, and it's really kind of a single thing. And that's where you get your single pane of glass at. That's where you get your actual responding to alert is you should not be doing that connecting of the dots. That's what you're paying your detection response provider to do, as opposed to, okay, well, they're going to tell us all these things, and now we have to do all the investigating on the back end. It's the difference between actually having context into an alert and what's happening, as opposed to, okay, we're just responding to point in time stuff. The other thing that I will call out here is I brought up CNAP and the CSPM aspects there and how they're kind of isolation. You do still have to use those, right? It's not just, hey, push all this to your MDR provider, you're done, you don't have to do anything with it, they're just going to detect everything. Your MDR provider's the last line of defense. I've responded to dozens of incidents, and there is still work that has to be done on the front end. So if people are coming up and saying, hey, just go with us and you don't have to worry about security anymore, that's not really how it works, right? You have to be able to leverage some of these other tools. You have to work with them. You have to have some of that expertise to really get what you want out of honestly, a last line detection and response provider.
And I think for a provider to be able to really tie everything together, right? Like I would love if there was a standardization on logging and data integrations, right? Like it would make our lives so much easier if every time it was this in this field and we knew exactly what it was in the definition. The reality is everybody does it a little bit differently. And then parsing changes as you upgrade your devices. And maybe that field is now over there in that field. One key thing that I think a provider also needs to have capabilities around is that data engineering component so that they can ensure that all of that data is normalized, right? That was something that we built into our solution where we bundle Cribble into every single one of our engagements. And that allows us to do data pipelining engineering to get everything in a really consistent format by the time it reaches our end platform that we actually do the detections and the analysis and the hunting in it, which is Google SecOps, which also has a very robust normalized data model. So when you have those two pieces and that expertise to really make sure that you're able to map all of that data, translate all of that data, enrich it in a consistent format, then it's very easy to focus on the overall threat instead of maybe just an individual alert. And you start to see indicators from multiple different sources and being able to stitch that all together in a single timeline or look at how all of those entities are kind of interrelated with each other. That allows somebody to much more easily see that bigger picture there. And that doesn't just come from having 19 different technologies in your environment doing detection. That's the effort of stitching it all together and making sure that there is a common naming and mapping of all of that data together so that analysts can be much more effective and efficient and then actually start to take those response actions. So would also be something that I recommend out there as you evaluate providers is what is their capability to normalize data when things aren't as standard as we'd like them to be. As we've supported SIM customers for a very long time, and it's a very common pain point is I'm sending all of my data in, but I am struggling to actually get it truly normalized, or the level of effort to remap and reparse or do all of these extensions. It's just really dragging my team down. That's where we can bring some expertise to help that and make that a little bit more easy for you by taking on that data engineering, that data pipelining component, and including that as part of the overall outcomes that we do with our detection response services.
And I just want to add on that because I think one of the things, we talked about this beforehand, where it's a understanding what your MDR provider is good at and what they do. it's also it's a big part of that, right? Is saying, hey, we provide context around things, but also understanding, hey, okay, how are they bringing these things together, and what does it actually mean in your environment? All too often, what I would see when responding to incidents is they've got really great external C2 detections, right? But ultimately, that never really played a role in what they were doing, and they had that normalized data, but they never normalized what was happening internally. I would see logins for the same account, but it was different forests, or it was different levels of where that account was logging in at, from a local account to an AD login to a hybrid login, and ultimately understand your MDR providers operating at scale. They have to be able to do this. They have to have that context kind of built in from the start. You can't just they're not just going to do it for you, right? So when they talk to you about, okay, we're going to do data engineering, but we're going to also automate everything up front, think about what that actually means. Once again, it's not just something you can do off the bat. You have to have that partner there.
All right, so we have one question we received ahead of time, but if you guys out there in the audience have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. What challenges exist in cloud threat detection, and how does MDR help organizations overcome these?
I'll jump in first, John, but I know you've got opinions on this. So I think the biggest challenge from a cloud threat standpoint here is there's been a huge push to doing SaaS applications. There's been a huge push to cloud applications and hosting things off of there. No one wants to run their own data center anymore, which I don't blame them. I don't want to run my own data center anymore either. The problem that comes out with that is it's disparate, right? You have a login for AWS. You have a login for Azure, which, by the way, will a lot of times be the same login that you have for your environment, and maybe for some VPNs, but maybe you have a separate identity provider that tries to put them together, right? It's all disparate things. And the problem is that attackers don't think of this as all disparate things. They will see, okay, we've tipped over their account in Azure, but they're not just going to stop there, right? They're not just going to hold themselves to a singular environment. They're going to say, okay, what other credentials can I get access to, and what else can I access? I saw this time and time again where they moved from cloud accounts with VPN access and they had all the protections, and they moved to a backup account that was really just a service account with no MFA, and they could access anything in the environment. And MDR providers would catch the first one at some point, but the attacker had already gotten into these accounts that were doing the backup and the service account stuff. And ultimately, there was no actual way to detect that there, because they could not see the follow-on. And that's the problem with disparate environments. It's why everyone's pushed single pane of glass for so long. It's not really a thing. We talked about this here, but it's not really a thing. But ultimately, your MDR has to be able to help you provide context to an actual detection and response solution, and across these various disparate actions, and bring it together. That's what you're paying them for. You're paying them to do detection, as opposed to just, okay, respond to this alert. This looks bad. Please go investigate this, right?
No. And I think it also comes down to defense in depth there, right? A lot of these cloud environments, they're not as well protected or organized. It's easy to spin up these applications or cloud native applications, but then they think that everything is already secure. Just maybe doing the application logging is good enough to get the right telemetry in to detect threats or misuse of that platform. So I still think it comes down to a lot of basics around still architecting and understanding the different tools within your environment, what you have, and then what are you actually using to protect them, and leveraging some of those cloud native protection platforms, as well as Ben mentioned with like CNAPP. It doesn't always make sense to like log the raw Kubernetes logs in an underlying cloud application. Like in some cases, you need to be protecting that with a web application firewall, and then the cloud native component of that as well to protect it. So I think still having that better understanding of what your environment actually is, where does everything sit, what is it exposed to, and where can you implement classic security tools to help protect those applications. Just fully understanding that environment. That's typically the biggest challenge that we see, and making sure that you have a provider that can actually integrate with all of those services or tools to protect those components.
And we had a question from Mark in the chat asking, hey, how easy is it to integrate your service with the existing IT environments? And I'm not going to talk about Optiv's MDR service. We do that. But honestly, when anyone's looking at any MDR service, they should be integrating with your existing IT environment, right? If they're asking you to say, so there's 2 red flags. Hey, change up everything that you're doing and then put it into us, and we promise it'll be good. Be really cautious of that, right? That think about what that means from an infrastructure back end. Think of it, not only think of the amount of work that you have to do, but think of what they've actually done from a detection methodology in the back end. If they require you to do X, Y, and Z and 1,000 different things up front that don't make sense from a technical perspective, right? Like asking you to set up a data management layer, that's probably going to be helpful for you. But on the other hand, saying, hey, change up how you got to switch over to AWS, you can't use Azure, that's a big problem, right? That's telling that they don't have great detection methodology. On the other hand, the other thing that they should be doing is there's great detections out of the vast majority of cloud platforms at this point, right? Microsoft has a great suite for their detection, for their detections. They've got great Defender. They've got this great Defender suite across all aspects, and your provider should be able to use that, right? They shouldn't just say, okay, our algorithm's going to take care of that. You don't have to integrate any of that data, right? On the other hand, if they are saying, hey, we only take X amount of, we can't look at all the stuff. We can only look at our things, and then we build our detections off of these really raw stuff. It's probably not going in there and utilizing a lot of the capabilities that you've already built in there. So think about, what is your MDR provider actually bringing you as well?
Let's see a quick question from Mark, another Mark in the chat here as well. And our Optiv MDR service, the question is, can that service replace the need of owning a SIM? And the answer is yes. We have a SIM as part of the solution. I would say definitely ask yourself on what are your other SIM use cases that you might have that are not focused on detection and response, and ensure that the offering can meet that. Our service does have that SIM component, but out of the box, we're not going to be addressing like telemetry around application performance. We are going to be focused on actually doing detection and response. Can it support those other use cases? Yes, but I would want to ask some other questions to make sure it can really get dialed in there. But our service can replace the need of owning a SIM yourself, and we will drive those detection and response outcomes.
Awesome. Well, John, Ben, thank you so much for the great discussion on MDR today. And thank you all for joining us on Optiv's LinkedIn Live today. If you'd like to connect with Optiv, you can connect with us at optiv.com to learn more about solutions and to simplify your cybersecurity. And for more insights, subscribe to our LinkedIn newsletter. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks all. Really appreciate it.